In this story, I'm going to tell you how I fixed a kid's bike for free and then watched a neighbor steal the credit on social media. But he didn't stop at a like. He used that lie to get favors and build a fake reputation. So I quietly gathered the evidence and made one calm, public move that didn't humiliate him so much as unmask him, and it changed our whole building. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and I am Evelyn Hart, 34, a woman who likes things honest and steady. My childhood was the sort that made you keep your hands busy. My father ran a small metal shop and my mother taught third grade, so Saturdays smelled like oil and crayons. I learned to tune out the static of city life and listen instead for precise rhythms, the tick of a timepiece, the particular cough of a bad carburetor, the warm fizz of conversation at dawn. Those rhythms shaped me. I work as a mechanic in a small shop near the east side, and I have a life that is easy to describe. I fix engines, I drink too much coffee, I listen to the rain on the roof, and I volunteer on weekends helping at a community bike repair program. I like my routines because they are like gears meshing. When they slip, you notice. I am not loud about my boundaries, but people who know me know I will not tolerate being used or lied to. I learned that from my mother, who kept the family honest even when money was thin, and from my father, who refused to cut corners on a weld. My friend group in Portland is tight. We cook for each other, swap tools, and help one another when the rent gets skimpier than it should. We are the kind of friends who will show up with coffee and a spare tire at 3 in the morning if a neighbor's kid needs a ride. I never expected that one small act of kindness would flip everything. The problem started when I agreed to help out my neighbor, Mia, a single mother who worked 2 jobs and needed a bike for her son to get to school. I had a spare, a decent one, and it was nothing for me to tune it up on a Thursday and hand it over with a helmet and a lock. I remember the day clearly. A damp morning with the smell of cut grass and wet pavement, the kid's shy grin when I tightened the seat, Mia's hands thick with gratitude and worry. She cried, she hugged me, and I felt good for the next week. Then I saw what she posted online. Mia wrote a long, flashy post on a neighborhood feed about how some angel in the building had rescued her son, how a kind stranger had spent hundreds replacing a bike for them, and whoever that mystery helper was would be rewarded. She named no names, and it would have been anonymous and fine, but then she added a friend tag to her boyfriend, Darren, and made a joke about how lucky she was to have such a generous man in her life. The thing is, Mia and I had been friendly, not romantic, and Darren and I had a tense history. He was the kind of man who liked to take credit, who liked to position himself as the hero in other people's stories while he yelled at cashiers and left his trash in the hallway. He was known for showing up late to community meetings and then talking loud, for borrowing tools and never returning them. The neighborhood nodded and congratulated Darren in the comments, and someone even asked if the mystery benefactor had been a man. I felt a slow burn the way you feel a radiator starting to wake up in autumn. It was not just the miscredit. It was the idea that Darren could rewrite reality in public to make himself look like something he was not. Mia did not correct it. She let the credit settle on him and even laughed in a comment, leaving me to sit and watch her let a lie become fact. That's where the threat started. My generosity was being stolen, my credibility being used as decoration for someone else's ego. My problem was not money or the bike, it was the principle. I could ignore it, but I could also let it become the rule. I did not want that for my street, and I certainly did not want that for myself. I decided then I would fix the record, because allowing a small theft of truth felt like the first step toward letting more important things slide. I wanted to show people in my building that names mattered, that credit mattered, and that someone who played the hero on social media could not be allowed to build a reputation on someone else's kindness. I tried to fix things directly at first. I messaged Mia privately and asked her to edit the post to add my name, just to make sure the story was straight for the kid who now rode that bike. She was apologetic and said she did not want drama. She would add a line later. Days passed and the post kept getting reshared by other neighbors praising Darren. I went to the building board meeting and told a careful story about the bike donation without naming names, hoping someone would mention it publicly and set the record straight. That did not work. When I bumped into Darren in the stairwell and asked him if he had been at the bike handoff, he smirked and said, "I do what I can," and walked away. I tried small, low-risk moves first because rocking the boat had consequences. People avoid conflict here, and I did not want to become the loud neighbor who started fights. But each attempt felt softer than I imagined. The post gained its own life. The issue grew when Darren started to use that supposed act of generosity as a means to get favors. He leaned into being seen as helpful to get loan tools, to charm a landlord, and to make himself look better in front of someone he hoped to impress. One morning, a coffee shop owner told me that Darren had casually mentioned the bike to justify charging a neighbor lower rent because of his good deeds. That was the line. My single act of kindness was now currency in his ledger. I began to lose patience. I printed screenshots of the original post, the comments assigning credit to Darren, and my private messages with Mia asking her to correct it. I left a few copies anonymously on the building notice board with a simple note: "Truth matters, credit matters." People joked that it was mature but quiet, and some brushed it off. The real escalation came when I decided to expose the pattern of behavior rather than just this one moment. I spent evenings talking to people who had worked with Darren on community projects. I found at least 3 instances where he had exaggerated his role, taken praise he had not earned, or misrepresented his actions to make himself look more caring or important. I gathered small, mundane pieces of evidence: a photo where his name was added to the caption, but he was not in the frame; a message where he wrote to a neighbor claiming he organized a donation when someone else had; a rent ledger where he had gotten perks from someone who thought he was generous. Each piece alone was weak. Together they formed a pattern. I printed them, made copies, and taped them to the walls of the common room where people picked up flyers and community notices. I kept my name off of everything. I told myself I was protecting others from a man who thrived on borrowed virtue. But then things went south. I had misjudged how neighbors would react to public shaming. Instead of calling Darren out in a measured way, the paper trail ignited gossip. People began to talk about his personality, then about his temper, then about things that had nothing to do with the bike. Conversations that had been small and civil turned sharp at the edges. Laundry room gossip swelled into whispered warnings in elevators. The goal had been to correct an injustice. The consequence was that a man's reputation was crumbling in a way I had not fully intended. I had won attention, but I had also catalyzed a social avalanche. It made me question whether I had become petty. I replayed the moments in my head: how I chose snippets to print, how I arranged them on the wall like evidence in a case, trying to convince myself the construction was fair. I told myself that if someone else had been the villain, I would have done the same. Still, at night I lay awake, tracing the line where principle bled into vindictiveness. The low point came when Darren began to suspect someone had started his downfall. He confronted a neighbor in a menacing way, and in a rush of anger, accused me without evidence. The building manager called me into her office to ask if I knew anything. My anonymous campaign had backfired into a personal accusation. For a few days, I feared physical retaliation, and I slept in short bursts with tools within reach. I felt like someone who had started a small fire to cook a meal and watched it curl into the draperies of the living room. I had tried to do good, and in trying to fix one thing I had made the mess bigger and worse. It was the lowest I had gone, feeling guilty for exposing a man and guilty for not stopping sooner. That was the moment when I realized I had 2 choices: retreat and let the lie stand, or step forward and own my role and finish what I had started with clarity and purpose. I chose the second path and planned a final move that would be honest and sharp without being cruel. I wanted the truth to land cleanly, not as a smear. I typed a clear, factual letter. I described the bike, the day and time I had repaired it, and included a photo of the bike with my initials etched into a small part of the frame I recognized from my work. I attached printouts of the messages where Mia had agreed to add my name and the screenshots of the neighborhood post. I addressed this packet to the building association, to the landlord, and to the neighborhood feed moderators. I signed it with my full name and a short note about why transparency matters. Then I did something that took equal parts courage and stubbornness. I knocked on Mia's door, looked her in the eye, and asked her to publicly correct the post. I told her I would not pursue exposing others if she fixed the attribution and apologized to me. She hesitated, saying she was nervous about stirring up drama, but I reminded her that the kid who now rode that bike should know who actually paid for it. She agreed to post a correction. At the same time, I delivered the packet to the association and the landlord. I asked them to keep the matter factual and to consider a rule where any community donation listed on the feed must include the actual giver. I did not ask for punishment for Darren. I asked only that credit be accurate and that the community be protected from narratives built on false praise. The reaction was not instant theater. The correction post appeared later that day from Mia. She wrote a brief, honest note. She had been overwhelmed and had not understood how the story drifted, and she corrected the credit to me. She apologized for any confusion. Neighborhood moderators appended a small policy notice to the feed about better attribution for donations and assistance. The landlord sent an email echoing the value of honesty and asked building managers to remind tenants to be precise when praising generous acts. Darren replied with a short, sharp message in the thread, trying to spin his involvement as support. A few neighbors called him out with details I had collected, but the tone was calmer than before because the facts were now on the table. The consequence felt poetic. I had exposed a false hero, not to humiliate him, but to protect truth. Darren did not leave the building, but his sudden habit of leaning on his self-created reputation faded. People still spoke with him. He went on to the grocery store and the coffee shop, but there was no longer a halo around him. He could no longer extract favors by telling stories that were not his. For me, the reward was quieter. The boy who rode the bike knew who fixed it. Mia and I spoke later, and she admitted she had panicked when everyone started praising Darren and had not known how to correct it publicly. She promised to be more careful in the future, and we moved from awkward neighbors back to friendly ones. I felt vindicated, but not gleeful. It was a relief more than triumph. I changed my approach to how I give help. I still fix bikes and hand them over without much fanfare, but I have learned to leave a business card tucked beneath the seat or mark my work in a place that stays mine. The building association adopted a small rule about giving credit. The unexpected twist came weeks later when Darren, in a quieter tone, knocked on my door and offered to help me with a heavy engine I was replacing in my shop. At first I said no, thinking about the way he had used other people. Then I watched him hand me a genuine, steady set of gloves and listened to instructions without trying to take credit. He was practicing humility, or perhaps just changing tactics. I realized my revenge had not been to ruin him, it had been to make our small community value truth more than headlines. The new normal in my part of Portland felt steadier, and I slept better at night knowing a small kindness had not vanished into someone else's story. Looking back, I see the whole arc like a bike ride with a steep hill in the middle. It started with a generous impulse, slid into frustration when that impulse was misassigned, then exploded when I tried a scattershot approach and hurt more than I meant to. The final attempt worked because it was direct, honest, and public in the right way. There are small details I keep in my head, the way cyclists memorize potholes, the exact scrape on the rear fender where I'd soldered a patch, the faint smell of chain lube that lingered after I handed the bike over, Mia's face when she accepted it, red-eyed and relieved. Those details are evidence in my private courtroom that I did not imagine any of it. I learned 3 lessons I repeat when I teach kids at the community bike clinic. First, put your name on your work so no one else can claim it. I etch initials under seats now and leave a folded card taped inside the frame, tiny marks that survive weather and gossip. Second, correct false stories calmly and with facts, not gossip. The louder you get, the more the story becomes theater and nobody remembers the truth. Third, consider the consequences of public exposure before you pull the pin. Shame can ripple in ways you never intended. I still think about the night I taped those photocopied messages to the community board and watched the room change. People who had barely spoken to one another started to fill silence with speculation. A few voices grew cruel in the dark. That ripple taught me the value of measured clarity. For all the drama it caused, the end result was simple. My name was on the bike and truth had been restored. The building association printed a small note about attribution, and the moderators added a line to the feed. Please name givers. It was modest, but rules shape behavior more than one angry post ever could. I sometimes run into Darren at the neighborhood recycling center. He will tip his hat, and I will nod. We are not friends in any grand sense, but he has stopped using other people's generosity as a ladder. The first time he offered to help me in the shop after the correction, I watched him with the same patience I offer an apprentice. He showed up with a pair of sturdy gloves and no story. He worked under my instruction and left without announcing anything. Maybe he learned humility, maybe he learned it's easier to ask than to invent. The boy still rides his bike to school with a smile, and when he passes my garage he sometimes yells, "Thanks, Ms. Evelyn." I have kept a small ritual since. I tuck a new tube or a candy in my pocket for him when I see him. Those little things are not for credit, they are the quiet stitches that sew the neighborhood together. That call is enough. It is small, honest, and mine.